we had a high school graduation where you got 2 tickets just in case it rained and they had to hold it in the auditorium, right? And then if not, you could have as many people as you wanted. So we sent him one and it didn't rain. And so I thought, well, for sure he's going to come. And I looked around and, you're looking around, it's like he's not there. And so that was the first experience I had where I'm like, oh, okay, like this is for real, right? Because I had seen him in the courthouse and we didn't have any visitation. Like that wasn't a thing. Like it's not that the judge prevented him from doing that. I think he just thought he couldn't or didn't want to because he didn't want to interface with my mom. And so I was like, well, okay, and then I thought, well, for sure he's going to come to my, high school graduation, of course, right? And he didn't come. And then, after a while, I'm just like, well, okay, this isn't good.
All right, guys. Hey, welcome to another episode of the Mediocre Dads podcast, where being mediocre is a choice and you have to refuse to be mediocre every single day. I'm your host, Queon. I go by Q, and on this phenomenal episode of the podcast, I'm joined by a guest named Joe Dillon. And honestly, when I was reached out to about talking to him, first and foremost, guys, if you email me, forgive me, I'm terrible at responding. Forgive me. It's a one-man show over here. So like I have I'm up, it's up to me to post everything on social media. It's up to me to answer emails. And if you could see my email on my phone, when you got the email app and it has like, oh, you have like 5 missed emails. I'm at 15,000. So like, give me a break, please. So I say that just to emphasize, like I have some individuals have reached out to me to be on the show and I'm terrible at responding. So I apologize. But nonetheless, when I was reading what you're about, Joe, and everything that you do, I was like, oh my goodness, it's like you were a blessing from God, because I was literally sitting there having this conversation / thought with a friend of mine about, literally about this topic of divorce, not personally, but for my divorce, but like I'm not going to divorce, guys, but just the topic of like, oh, like what happens when, parents go through divorce, and how, generally women get more of the benefit, or the mom gets more of the benefit than the dad. And it just feels like the dad is just left high and dry. And so many people try to do it by themselves versus seeking mediation. And having someone as a middle person to be like, okay, hey, you tell me what you want, she'll tell me what she wants, and then we got to find a way to meet in the middle and go from there, right? Rather than just you two yelling at each other and going from there. But before we get too deep into it, because I know this is going to be a great conversation, guys, I first and foremost, I want to let Joe kind of give an opportunity to introduce himself. So, Joe, can you introduce yourself to the audience and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for having me, Q. I really appreciate it. I'm
Absolutely.
Joe Dillon. Boy, I've been mediating for 28 years now, which is really scary to say because I don't feel that old. So you start going, just counting on the head, fingers and toes, right?
Old did he say?
How did what happened here? It's like, oh my goodness. In private practice with Equitable Mediation, a company I founded for 17 years. My wife, Cheryl, is also my partner. She's our divorce coach, which will probably bring her into the conversation a bit. But I'm a child of a litigated divorce, right? So my parents did exactly as you said, the knockdown, drag out, hire the lawyers, scream and yell, all the worst of both worlds. They fought so much. Last time I saw my dad, I was sitting in the back of a courtroom at 15, and that was it. Saw him in the hall. Bye. Never saw him again, and never heard from him, and that was it. In 2019, I got a letter in the mail that said he died, and
Wow.
that was all I knew. So for however many years that math works out to be, I hadn't seen or heard from him. So, part of that, right, in some professional, some mental health professional would have a field day with me, right, going, I know exactly why you do this, Joe, right? I was like, okay, guilty as charged, right? But I really want to help people like you. Perfect description, right? Instead of yelling at each other, get a neutral third party in the room. So that's what I help people do. My background is finance, negotiation, help people work through all the issues of their divorce, draft up paperwork, help them move through the process, because look, if we only have one go round on this planet, right, and we have one life to live, don't you want to be happy? And if you're in this relationship that's making you unhappy, I'm not pro divorce by any stretch, but
Mm,
if we can get to a place where we're happy, we're better people, better parents, and we let go of that relationship, who knows what's around the corner, right? What
yeah.
blessings, what gifts are ahead of us, and by getting through this process in a peaceful, respectful, amicable manner, I really believe that you can open yourself up to those new possibilities, right? You can't
Mm.
see it at this time because the world is falling in on you, but if we can make this less of a disaster, you can repair and rebuild and move forward. And so that's what we try to do every day with our client couples.
Got you. It's crazy because I have a really good friend, close friend of mine. Some would say he looks just like me. I'm joking. It is my twin brother, but he unfortunately had to go through a divorce, and I remember having several conversations with him beforehand, and one of the things that me and him were kind of talking about was like I said, like, hey man, I was like, have you ever thought about like getting a mediator, right? Like, and this was
Hmm.
kind of beforehand,
Yeah.
but in the end, when they went through that process, they hired a mediator, they got a mediator involved, and that's what it literally took a day. Like they met on craziest thing, poor guy, on our birthday, November 12th.
Oh no.
And it's just, and they mediated everything. They have a young daughter together, so and that they came to their agreement, their settlement, and that was that. But
Yeah.
without the mediator, I think it would have dragged on even longer, right? Like
Yeah. Absolutely.
they were again. I'm not trying to put my brother's business too much out there, but they were separated for a few years, before they finally said, all right, we have to get this finalized and figured out.
Okay.
So totally one of those things where I totally concur, and I totally believe and like what you do, because I think it is such an essential thing to do. Part of that, if you have to go through the divorce process,
Right.
because man, we can. Gosh, I'm sure you have stories of where you can see these people and you're like,
Yeah.
you got at one point you guys loved each other. Like I have to
Exactly.
believe at one point you loved each
Exactly.
other, because man, oh man, like you got married and you had one kid, or for some they have multiple kids. It's like, so
Hmm.
like obviously you loved each other enough to keep doing the deed, to keep growing your family. Like, so like
Right.
the hate and the animosity that you feel for each other right now, it has to be some form of temporary,
Yeah.
or hope it is temporary, not just for the rest of your life. But before we get into too much into stories of or some experiences that you've come across,
Sure.
I want to ask about your personal experience. So
Yeah.
you talked about your dad, and he said after your parents split and divorced, and you 15 years old and you didn't see him again. I mean, did you ever try to reach out to him? Was there ever like, hey, like, can I see him? Or did the judge, and I'm going to ask you a compound question, I apologize.
Yeah. No
And
problem.
did the judge say like, hey, like, no contact with your son? Like, what, I guess kind of more like, can you tell us more what happened? Because
Yeah. Sure.
obviously a son at 50, especially at 15 years old, you want to see your dad, like, you know what
Oh,
I
yeah.
mean? Like, and especially when you've had both your parents around for that long,
Right.
of 15 years of your life,
Yeah.
to go from both of them to just only one of them. I mean, you're grateful for having one of them around, but still you're like,
Right.
hey, like, I still love my dad. Like, where is he
Yeah.
at? So can
Yeah.
you kind of walk us through that and kind of tell us a little bit more?
Yeah, certainly. And there's conversations, right, that, you know, typically, a guy is going to have with his dad, right? And God
Yeah.
bless my mom. She did a great job with that, right? Like she was right in there. So I was like, good job, right? A plus, mom. Yeah. And so what's interesting, right, is that, what was really, I think, most confusing for me about the process. So as a young kid, right, my dad, he was like that neighborhood dad, right? He was the coach
Mm-hmm.
of our baseball team, the scout leader. And I remember he had a pickup truck and we all got to ride in the back. This is going back into the 80s, right?
Yeah.
So, you're not supposed to be doing that, bouncing around. We thought it was hilarious. We wanted him to hit bumps so we could potentially fall out of the back of the truck, right? On the way to get ice cream. It'd be cool if I whacked my head.
Yeah.
And so he was that fun guy, right? And then, my parents, they fought a lot and there would be a lot of times where they would be silent. And what was really difficult was being in that house with them where it was quiet. So at first there was a lot of screaming and yelling, right? And so you knew something was wrong, you'd go hide in your room. But then when it was quiet, that was even worse because you just knew that parents and, moms and dads and husbands and wives are supposed to talk to each other. And, I was young, but I wasn't that young. I was like 11, 12, 13, as it started building up. And you're like, boy, this is really awkward, right? And so my dad kind of receded for those years, right? As I was kind of like in sixth, seventh, eighth grade. And then my parents, he moved out like my freshman year of high school. And so he went from being this guy that was like always around. He worked in construction. So he was always home early, like 3:30, 4 o'clock, union guy. And it was great because like I could play catch with my dad at like 4 o'clock in the afternoon. How cool is this, right? Like he's around. And so we had weekends and he didn't have a job where he had to keep checking in like everybody does now. And so to have it go from that to basically nothing was really jarring. And a lot of it had to do, and I would imagine, again, there's three sides to every story, right? I would think 100% of it really had to do with his anger towards my mother. And so, as an adult, right, you look back and you try and unpack all these things by yourself with the help of professionals and things like that. And, I see it now where, my mom, I'm an only child. And so, my mom was really doting on me. And I think what happened was, she kind of took over as the primary caregiver. She stayed home with me. And then she, in effect, excluded my dad, right? Like, in other words, she knew what was better. She was the mom. She was in charge. And so my dad probably just was like, well, then what am I doing here? Right? I'm out. And so I think that's really what he felt. And then what really started impacting me the first time was my high school graduation. So we had a high school graduation where you got two tickets just in case it rained and they had to hold it in the auditorium, right? And then if not, you could have as many people as you wanted. So we sent him one and it didn't rain. And so I thought, well, for sure he's going to come. And I looked around and, you're looking around, it's like he's not there. And so that was the first experience I had where I'm like, okay, like this is for real, right? Because I had seen him in the courthouse and we didn't have any visitation. Like that wasn't a thing. Like it's not that the judge prevented him from doing that. I think he just thought he couldn't or didn't want to because he didn't want to interface with my mom. And so I was like, well, okay, and then I thought, well, for sure he's going to come to my, high school graduation, of course, right? And he didn't come. And then, after a while, I'm just like, well, okay, this isn't good. And he did send, thankfully, he did send money to me every week in college, right? When I was in college, without fail, clockwork, he sent me a check. So I didn't have to have a job, which I really appreciated, right? Because it was hard to go to college and be on your own for the first time, right?
Yeah.
But that wasn't his role, but I think that's what he felt like. He just felt like he was the checkbook. And I had written him and he wrote back. And then I think that was about it. And so then it just kind of, it just kind of fizzled from there. And then I guess maybe about 10 years after I'd last heard from him, this letter probably happened when I was like 18 or 19. Of my cousin on my mom's side actually was working with one of his nieces, a cousin of mine who I had lost touch with from the divorce. And so through, back channel, reached out to me. And I said, it's been now at this point 15 years. He didn't come to my high school graduation. He didn't come to my college graduation. He never tried to reach out. I think I just have to protect myself, right? And I need to walk forward. And it wasn't, that I was mad at him, but I was just kind of like, done,
Yeah.
and I was disappointed because I'm thinking, hey, you guys are the adults here, right? How come I'm the more mature one in this mix? And so, the years have gone by. I got married. I have a wonderful wife, happy marriage. And then in 2019, I got a letter that he died. And that was it, right? And there was nothing in the will, no nothing. And then the weirdest thing was I said, well, geez, now that he's dead, like, do I have regrets and this and that? My wife, she was really good. Do you have regrets? Are you feeling okay? Do you want to talk about it? Right? Of course not. I don't want to talk about it. What is wrong with you? And so, I finally just said, let me poke around. And I found his obituary online and I wasn't even mentioned. Right. And I'm like, dang. I was like, that's cold. Right. Like he got remarried. He mentioned his stepson. He mentioned his nieces and nephews. And, and I'm just like, wow, that's pretty harsh. It's like I never even existed. So in a weird way, I guess, I have to make peace with that. And I have. And I try to use that as an example, right? Even in my own life, I say there are people sometimes you want to cut them off, you don't want to talk to them, but I always give people that additional benefit of the doubt, kindness, generosity, human kindness, because I know that you never fully understand the story, And as I've gotten older and I look back and I look at the things my mom did, I'm like, yeah, it was a little passive aggressive. Like, you really don't want to see your father, do you? Like, that's how
Yeah.
the question would get phrased.
Yeah.
And so you're like 12 years old and going, no, is that the right answer? Right? I don't know. So, yeah, you're it's a lose lose, right? And
Yeah.
so as I've gotten here to this place in my life now, I use this as a story, right? And I use this not to, as a tear jerking story or to try to manipulate people, but to say to people who are in my office or virtually in my office, if you're going to go through a divorce, don't do this, right? Do not be these people, because your
Yeah.
kids are going to spend the rest of their lives, like I have, wondering, what did I do wrong? Is this my fault? Like, what could I have done differently? Right. And
Mhm.
that's not a place you want to put them in. So that's where I am at this point today.
That, and I know you said, you don't tell this to be a tearjerker, try to get, more or less pity from people. But,
Right.
there is some sympathy there in as well, because it's like how, as I think about it this way, right? And I kind of, I think what most people do, they relate it to themselves.
Hmm.
And so when I hear your story and your experience, I sit there and I think, okay, if I did that to my kids, how do I how do I move on? You know what I mean? Like,
Hmm.
how do I completely just move on and act like none of them ever existed? And I couldn't do it. I really couldn't do it. And and this is not to take an attack at your dad. But I think that obviously there are things that generationally obviously very different, right? Like
Hmm. Right.
what was the norm from him generation growing up, and if that divorce happened, kind of what that looked like and what was expected of you, and versus now, comparatively versus now. So don't no complete hate on your dad, but at the same time just kind of like, dang, like missed opportunity, to really see, where his son has become, or what his son
Yeah.
became, especially, and then not only I don't know, to pass away, and then be like, did he think about me? So many
Right.
questions I imagine going through
Yeah.
your head. You know
Right.
what I mean? Like, again, and I'm putting myself in your shoes. I'm thinking, my gosh, like
Yeah.
I would have more than 21 questions. Like, this would not be
Yeah.
21 questions.
Right.
This would be 150 questions ready to go, lock and loaded. So I can only imagine, kind of how you felt in that moment. But and so this conversation can be especially when let's just be frank, two men are having this conversation, right? And we are usually, if divorce is happening, we are the ones usually on the losing side. And I say losing side, meaning more times than not, don't have to be divorced to know this, but to see and hear, it's majority of the time is it favors the mom. The mom is favored over the dad in when it comes to divorce, especially if kids are involved.
Hmm.
And I know, and from my understanding, this has to do with the fact that this idea, the premise is that moms are more of nurturers, and so that's more because they're more of nurturing and more of nurturers. It's just always been the tendencies of like, hey, save the women and the children, right? So like the
Hmm.
tendency give the children to
Sure.
the mom, which in some sense I can respect, but at the same time, you know, when you have people sitting in front of you, right, and they're going through this divorce and the process, and of course you wish that and hope that it's two adults in the room. it's,
Always questionable, but yeah,
always
hope.
questionable, right? But
Hope, right, Q?
yeah,
Hope.
you hope there's two adults in the room, and you're
Right.
sitting there and you're like, okay, all right, here we go. And within about 5-10 minutes, I imagine, something is said. There's a trigger, and then next thing you know, the adults leave the room, and the kids enter, and it is now full blown two grown adults going at each other and saying, you did this to me, and then you did
Right.
this, and then it's all your fault, and
Yeah.
and you're just sitting, and I imagine you're sitting there just like, hey guys, like, all of those things could be true, right?
Right. Exactly.
I like, and the crazy part is that's not my job. But
That's
I'm here
exactly
for it.
right.
What I'm here for is to help you figure out how you're going to separate these things amicably and both of you in some sort of way get a win. Come out, leave you this room at least with happy with what occurred, what it would what
Something,
went
right?
down, right?
Exactly.
You know,
Yeah.
so how does I have two questions? It's a twofold question here, right?
Sure.
So the first being, now that this is what you do for a living, how do you navigate that when you have two people sitting in that room or virtually with you, and they're just like, this person is the spawn of Satan, and I want them to have nothing, right?
Right.
How do you
Right.
navigate that in that conversation to get it to a point of like, okay, sure, I don't know this, I don't know Joe Schmo over here, and you could tell me he's evil, and I'll believe, sure, he could tell me you're evil, sure. Again,
Yeah.
not my place to say if that's the truth or not,
Yep.
but how do you navigate that? But then, two, if your parents would have had a mediator such as yourself or this person that what you do right now, how much do you think things would have been different?
Oh yeah. Well, I'll answer the second question first because that's
Okay,
an easy one. That's a
gotcha.
really easy one. That would be completely different. Attorneys, right? They advocate for one person only, right? I'm not a lawyer. So they advocate for their client and their client only, and it doesn't matter what happens to the other side,
Mm-hmm.
right? And we know this from anybody who has had an attorney. Sometimes you want or need an attorney, right? So if you're at like some big box retailer and something falls off their shelf and cracks you on the noggin and you need to be on medical leave or something, yeah, you're going to need somebody to go to bat for you, right? But
Yeah,
in the case of a divorce, you shouldn't be battling with the person that, by my estimation, right? I don't know, I got married in front of 90 of my closest friends and family, my best man in the wedding party. And then there was, we had a priest and a rabbi because we're an interfaith couple. And, so you've got all these people that you're standing up in front of and saying, this is the person for me. I love and respect and honor this person, right? Whether even if you did that in City Hall, you at least had to have a witness, right? So there were at
yeah,
least two other people, right, who said, yep, you guys, I know that to be true. Now here you are as warring factions calling each other names or treating each other like you wouldn't even treat your worst enemy this way, right? And
yeah,
so it's because those emotions are bubbling. And the attorneys in my parents' divorce certainly didn't do their jobs to manage the expectations, manage the emotions. And look, the model is broken, right? No disrespect, but attorneys bill hourly. You
yeah,
don't have a reason to settle anything if you're billed hourly. Like at Equitable, we do a flat fee. So we jump in and we say, look, we're going to go to the mat and finish this, right?
mm-hmm.
And we're so sure in our skills that we're willing to bet on ourselves that this is what it's going to cost and this is what it's going to take and let's go, right? And so I do think from that perspective, if my parents had somebody that was trying to get them to recognize the other person's side, right? As opposed to your lawyer is trying to screw me and your lawyer
Yeah,
is trying to cheat me, right? Because you can hide behind the lawyer and the lawyer is fighting on their client's behalf, right? And so that created a lot of consternation. In my world, to answer the other part of your question, I use the wedding reminder. I say, look, at some point you guys did love and care for each other, respect for each other. If you have kids, right, I'm always thinking like, listen, you're going to be co-parents, right? You're not going to be husband and wife anymore, but you're still mom and dad. That relationship doesn't change. Tell
mm-hmm.
them a little bit about my story, right? Because they want you there. Trust me, I am an example of that. They want you there. And do you really want to be standing awkwardly across from each other at the local pizza place on their seventh birthday, just giving each other the side eye while you're holding your slice of pepperoni, right? Like you want to be able to at least stand next to each other while they're opening their gifts and they turn around and go, Mom, Dad, look what I got, right?
Yeah,
That's what you want. You've got to appeal to that humanity of them. You've got to ignore what's happening between the two of you. And there's a great quote by a guy named Bird Baggett. And it's my favorite quote. And it's actually like I think it might even be in my email signature. And it's basically like, life is best viewed through the windshield, not the rear view mirror. And right, you think about it. It's like if you're driving, are you like this? Right? No, you're going to get in an accident really quick. It's going to turn into a train wreck. You're looking forward, you're looking through that windshield. And I'm reminding people, look, you've got your whole life ahead of you. You've got a whole life unfolding in front of you. You've still got a wonderful opportunity to do great things, be great people. let's get you there sooner rather than later, right? Because a mediated divorce, even with all the paperwork, all the discovery, all the pre-work, all of the stuff that goes into it, is like 2 to 3 months at tops, right? A litigated divorce, 2 to 3 years. I'm like, do you want to be spending 2 to 3 years of your life wasted in courtrooms and depositions and letters back and forth? No. Right. And if you can appeal not to get them to agree with each other, but appeal to their individual humanity, take the temperature of the room down, that clears the way for a lot more productive conversations.
Well, I think that's phenomenal. But I guess I would think that if anybody who is seeking mediation,
Mhm.
there is probably some form of like, hey, I do love this person, I always love this person. So I want to work, I want to do what's best for, for our kids.
Mhm.
So I imagine if they're seeking mediation, there is some form of like, hey, they want to do it in a way that is respectful and honorable, especially to their kid or kid.
Mhm.
When it comes to your, I guess, your profession, is it, hey, are you recommended by lawyers, or is it like, hey, do people just kind of look you up? Like, because again, I didn't know anything about mediation. I didn't know
A lot
it
of
was
people
a
don't. Yeah.
thing. Like, like tell that I recommended it to my brother in the sense of like when they were doing like marriage counseling. I'm like, hey man,
Right.
get in marriage counseling. I was like, you need a mediator. And I was like,
Right.
I'm saying, I was like, I love you, but I cannot be that mediator because like,
Yes,
I know
exactly.
y'all. I know both of y'all,
Right.
right?
Right. You. Yeah.
Like we see each other on Thanksgiving. Like I'm not gonna know what's going
Right.
on. I don't want to go know what's going on in the inner workings of your marriage, and then be like, so what's the
What's
news
new?
like? I guess
Look at
like
the time.
yeah, like no, like so like you guys need a mediator, and I
Yeah.
was like, that was my recommendation, and that's my recommendation to my soldiers, especially if they're going through divorces, because divorce unfortunately is a high in the military,
Absolutely. Yeah.
and I'm like, hey, like seek marriage counseling first, like don't
Right.
just give up on this person.
Exactly.
I remember telling this person, telling it one of my friends once. I said, because they're just like, you know what, I'm done. We're done. This is not going to happen. I'm just tired of the BS. And I said, bear with me for a second. I said, I want you to think. And again, we mentioned earlier, but I said, I want you to sit there and I want you to think about, close your eyes and think about what your wife looked like when she was walking down the aisle in her wedding dress.
Right.
I said, I want you to try to remember those emotions that you felt when you saw her for the first time in her wedding dress.
Hmm.
And walking down the aisle, she comes up, her dad hands her off, she's handed off to you. And then from there, the pastor, wherever you're at, they start to start the ceremony. And the one of the famous favorite things is there anybody here that doesn't think these two should be
Right.
could join together, right? Like, and everyone there on both sides is like, nah, this is it, they're meant to be, right? And then you have your first dance, but even before that you have your vows. You say
Right.
these passionate words of like, hey, this is how much I love you, and this is how much I'm willing to commit to you now and forever, for the rest of my
Hmm.
life. And then you have your first dance, and then obviously you consummate the wedding, right? We're adults, you all understand what that means.
That's right. Yeah.
You just consummate the wedding, right? But then
That's
like,
right.
but all of those feelings, all those emotions, there's so much emotion that goes in that day, in those different moments that you're
Right.
having, even for the pictures, right? Even for when the
Of
photographer's like,
course.
okay, hey, now you're gonna, you have her one leg up and you're holding her down, or like not holding her down, but like, like you're like almost like the dance move, right? And you're
Right. Sure.
leaning over
Sure.
and kissing her, or, I don't know, whatever poses you do when you're photography, but like, those moments, right? Like even when you're
Right.
just looking at each other and you're like, I'm married now. This is my wife.
Right.
This
Yeah.
is,
That
or
isn't
this is
that
my
strange, right?
husband.
When you say those words out loud.
Yeah, like so I'll give you my story, right? And my instance has heard this before, but I married my high school sweetheart, and so I met her when I was in seventh grade, she was in sixth grade, or no, sixth grade, and she was in fifth grade,
There
somewhere
you go.
around there.
All right.
Long time, but it was a long time
Right.
ago,
That's
right?
right.
And then we started dating in 2011, July 17th, 2011. She will murder me if I forgot that day. Anyway, Cars 2 was the movie women saw for our first date.
There you go.
But But anyway, we know we've been together ever since. I got married at 19 and she was 18. So she was when I asked her to marry me, and she was still finishing high school. So she's walking around with a wedding ring, an engagement ring, and all that. And then we got married, and we've been married ever since. And we're going on 11 years of marriage. And
Great.
so
Congratulations.
thank you. So like that again, like I remember, like I can tell you, I
Right.
remember the emotions, how nervous I was when I got down on one knee. I
Yeah.
remember the emotions and how nervous I was for the actual wedding. We got married on the beach in California, and like beautiful wedding. And I remember seeing her come down, and I'm like, that's for me.
Right.
You
Yeah.
know what I mean?
Right.
Like
Right. That's
that's
awesome.
that's for me. And then also I remember there's a photo. I wish I would have pulled it up here, but I have this photo from my wedding, and where it's it's the ceremonies that just finishes. We just kind of lift up our hands, and everyone's cheering and clapping. And when you're on a public beach, everyone who's there is cheering and clapping.
Everyone is a guest. Exactly.
Yeah. um which is awesome. And I have this photo. We have our hands up, and I'm looking down like this. I'm looking down at my ring because I'm like, oh my gosh, like I'm married now. Like, and that photo lives rent free in my head,
Right.
because in that moment I remember thinking to myself, literally, I'm married now. I have this ring on my finger that symbolizes my marriage, but like it's not like just like I've worn a ring before, or like jewelry
Sure.
before, but this means something.
Right.
This means something. And it was just like that moment of realization that was setting in. Is like, this is real. And
Right.
so I say all that to say, because I cannot imagine, like, there are arguments that me and my wife have.
Right.
Like, yes, I know, me and my wife argue. I still love her to this day, right? But we argue, and I sit there and I think, like, I would never be like, you know what? Yeah, I'm ready to leave you, right? Like,
Right.
this is it. We're done. And I say all this because, again, it's hard to imagine just how people can get to that point where, like, I despise this person. And I've seen it.
Yeah.
But I've seen
Yeah.
it where they're just like, they want nothing to do with each other. They literally, they hate each other. They'll say anything and everything about each other. They from saying, you emotionally or physically abused me, and that didn't happen,
Right.
you cheated on me. Is that baby even mine? And you're just sitting there just like, you guys loved each other. I don't
Right.
understand. I
Yeah.
just don't
Exactly.
understand. And again,
Yeah.
I'm not saying that, unfortunately, because I wanted to look it up, and I saw what I came up with. So it says, as of 2024, the divorce rate for first time marriages is 40 to 50%.
Hmm.
And I'm like, 40 to 50% of these people are getting married, and half of them are not going to last. So when you get someone in your room, and you're talking to them,
Yeah.
what do you notice that tends to be the reason that led to them saying, "Hey, we got to get divorced"?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things. When you talk about those statistics, one thing I want to comment on is that fewer people are getting married now.
Yes.
There's, younger generations are also delaying, right?
Mhm.
So average age of marriage is increasing, and contributing to that average, right? Averages can be deceptive. The divorce rate among what we call baby boomers, right? So maybe
Yeah.
people in late 50s, 60s, that divorce rate is much higher than 50%.
Oh
So
wow.
that's a generation that served their time, raised the kids, stayed quiet, right? And then said, I'm done, right? Because we were talking before we got on here about generational. So my dad, born in 1932, Irish as the day is long, right? Emotions don't even register on my dad. Navy man, just total, stone face, right?
Mhm.
And so for him to maybe walk away from me or something, there was no issue, perhaps. Maybe it just didn't even register for him, right?
Yeah.
More modern relationships are more communicative. Dads are more all in, right? They're more sensitive. So when I think about your question, one of the main reasons that I see people in my office with a divorce is they've simply stopped doing the work. And
Mhm.
the bottom line is this. I've been married 20 years, just celebrated 20 years. And
Awesome.
every day,
Congratulations.
right? Thank you. And every day I still say, please. I still say, thank you. I still say, excuse me. I ask if my wife would like a tea. If I see her going like this, I go behind her and I rub her neck, right? Because she's been working hard at her computer or whatever she's doing, right? And she does the exact same thing for me, right? We still respect each other. We still are engaged. We're still watching out for each other's needs. And part of that is just staying connected to each other, right? And asking simple things. How was your day? Bringing home flowers. She took me, I know that going out for barbecue is not her favorite thing, but on Father's Day, I ate more pulled pork, corn on the cob, coleslaw, cornbread, and baked beans than I could shake a stick at. I drank margaritas and sat on a golf course, right? And I was like, I was like, and God bless her, she was right there, and I was like, that meant a lot, right? We could have
Yeah.
gone to brunch and gotten mimosas or whatever, right?
Mm.
But that's part of it, right? So what I see a lot of is couples fade away because they didn't continue to do the work, like you just talked about, right? Remember that level of engagement, that level of excitement when you would do anything for your spouse, right? Look, man, life gets busy, jobs, kids, stuff happens. You get older, family members get sick, die, right? Friends move away, get sick, die. But that can't stop you from watering and maintaining the single most important adult relationship you have, and that's your spouse, right? And as we get older, right, we get more and more ingrained in ourselves and in our ways. And by being willing, and this is what I would say to everybody who's out there, guys, girls, everybody, be willing to learn, to continue to learn, right? And men and women, it's such a stereotype, but it is so true. I'm so analytical. I'm a problem solver. My dad is in the military. I'm process oriented action. If the
Mm-hmm.
building is burning, I'm the guy who runs in and rescues the kitten and doesn't think twice. My wife would freak out, cry. Where's the kitten? Oh my God, we have to talk to somebody about how we're going to. No, there's action,
Yeah.
right? And we laugh at each other and we do that. So we've kind of come to learn. It's as if I'm speaking French and she's speaking German and we're both just yelling at each other. So we've learned how to speak each other's language. So those couples haven't done that. The other thing I also see is they made a decision about roles and responsibilities. And typically what we'll
Mm.
see is they made a decision, they, air quotes, that mom was going to stay home, dad was going to work, right? And so what winds up happening? All the years go on. Mom's doing this, I could not pay my mom enough to raise me, right? I was a little hellion, right? And so the paycheck, I'd be bankrupt right now if I had to actually pay my mom to deal with my nonsense, right? Why did you cut the tree down? I have no idea it was there.
It
Did you
existed.
really need
I
to?
didn't want it to, and now it does it. There
Exactly. It seemed like a good idea to light it on fire also. And you're laughing because we've all done this. But, at the end of the day, right? It's like, well, mom did her job, dad did his job, went to work, earned the bread, earned the paycheck, right? And now they're total strangers because they
we
did
are.
this, right? He's not interested in her because all she's talking about is the kids and this and that. She's not interested in him because he's got the meetings and the phone and all of this stuff. And they don't understand each other. They don't understand that each of them worked when he says or she. And by the way, I have the opposite too. I have female breadwinners. A lot of that happening today. It's like, well, you stayed home with the kids. What? No, you worked inside the home. You worked outside the home.
Mm-hmm.
Collectively, you worked to build your family, to grow your family, to support your family, and you each took on a role. If you can respect and appreciate that other person's role and take an interest in it, then I do see people connected. But when they just become these perfect strangers because they're so wrapped up in their roles, that's when it falls apart. And so, that's really the shame. They're not willing to do the work and learn. They just kind of let things fade away. And a lot of these marriages and a lot of these relationships right now, I'm not saying, look, we also have clients where domestic violence is an issue,
Yeah.
financial infidelity, physical infidelity, substance abuse. I'm not saying these are the kinds of relationships that should maintain. But I got to tell you, I spend a fair amount of my time scratching my head because I'm like, man, if they just like turned the ship just a quarter turn this way, they
Yeah.
might have been able to get themselves back on track if they could just both admit that, maybe we could get this on track and I'm willing to do the work, right? But like you say, right, about the name of your podcast, your introduction, it's a choice to be mediocre.
Mm-hmm.
Don't then choose not to be. It's
Yeah.
your choice, right? Nobody says, hey, Q, you know what? You should take an average job and you should be an average dad and you should treat your wife okay, right? Versus,
Mhm.
hey, I'm going to choose to do this, right? And so that's what kind of sometimes gets me a bit fired up because I say, look, my job isn't to change your mind. I'm never going to try to put you back together, right?
Yeah.
But we have screening questions and we do ask questions. Have you done everything in your power to save your marriage? That is one of a divorce mediator has a screening question that asks you that, right? Like, so that's sending a little message like, hey guys, we'd love to lose you as a client. It's totally fine. We'd
Yeah.
rather there's going to be plenty of other people who can't figure it out. So
Yeah.
yeah, so that's kind of, that's kind of the perspective I bring to it.
It's funny. I think it's funny. Is it's kind of just like, hey, like I'm giving you an opportunity to say you don't need me, and I'm okay if you don't need me, and
Right.
and I think I think it's a beautiful thing because I would be very interested to know if people how many people answer that question honestly, because I
Right.
think when we I think we're all a little immature, or I'll put it this way: we're not as mature as we would like to think we are. No matter
Right.
what our age is, we're not as mature as we like to think we are. For example, you mentioned your dad being born in 32, so he was born during the Great Depression,
Mm-hmm.
and then right after that is there's World War II, right? So like fairly young man, and a lot is happening. He's born into a lot happening in his life,
Mm-hmm.
which taught him how to be him essentially, right? And then you said he joined the Navy, and I'm using your dad as an example because I think it gets to a point where you have these things that you're taught and subconsciously that you are
Yeah.
just like, this is just what life is, and this is how it's going to be. And
Right.
so when you make a decision, you say, well, I'm an adult now, I have to make a decision and I have to
Right.
stand by that decision because everyone says you have to stand by your decision. And
Yeah,
so
sure.
people get to the point they said, well, we said we're getting a divorce, so we have to get a divorce now. And even though there's these moments where you're like, is this a right idea? Well, no, we have to because we said we are going to do
Yeah.
it. And it's just kind of one of those, to be honest, to be frankly, stupid, just to be like, if you've done really all of the things you could do
Right.
to stay together or fix your marriage, I don't believe you would have as many clients as you did. Right.
Right.
And I don't know how
Yeah.
many clients you have. I don't. Right. But
Right.
I
But based on the
wholeheartedly
divorce rate in
believe.
America, you
Yeah,
can figure that math out, how many people get divorced every year, right?
exactly.
Yeah.
That's one of those things for me. But I was also thinking as you were talking is the meaning of marriage, not the definition, but the what it used to mean between a man and a woman to get married versus what it means to get married now. And
Mm-hmm.
I think it's been diluted a lot, right? It's been
Mm-hmm.
diluted
It has
down
changed.
what it from what it used to be, right? When two people used to get married, and I'm only 30 years old, so I don't really know before, obviously my time, but
Right.
when two people used to get married, there seemed to be this undying commitment that they were making. Again, as I mentioned, right, especially at the wedding, right, and it was like, hey, you know what, I made a commitment to stick with this person. I'm gonna stick with this person. And when you see those older folks who are in the retirement home, they're like, yeah, me and Jerry have been married for what feels like 100 years, but
Right.
I wouldn't
Right.
change it
And
for the
maybe it
world.
has been. Yeah.
Yeah, right. And nearly, but and you're like, gosh, like how did they make it? How did
Yeah.
they get to that? But you look at them and you could see it's this almost this twinkle in their eyes if they look at each other the same way that they from the moment they
Right.
saw each other said, hey, I love that person, or like,
Yeah.
hey, look, she looks good and she thinks I look good. I'm with that's what I see when I look at her, right?
Yeah.
And you could see that in their and when how they look at each other. And
Yep.
so we get to now and where I've had people ask me, they're like, oh, well, would you allow your kids to get married at 18 or 19? And I'll be honest with you, no, absolutely not. No, I told my father-in-law every single time I see him, I say, you must have known something that I didn't know because, if, my oldest is 7, and, so obviously years away from getting married, but,
Right.
if at 18, 19, she says, Dad, my boyfriend wants to talk to you. He wants to ask me to marry you, if he can marry me. I'm gonna be like, yeah, I'm gonna tell you right now, no, don't even
Have a
ask me.
seat, young
Yeah,
man.
yeah, like there's no conversation that will be had.
Yeah, exactly.
I will be like, I need something from you. You know what? If you want to marry my daughter, go do 4 years in the army, and then maybe we can talk.
Then
Or
we'll talk. Yeah,
yeah,
right.
you know what I'm saying? Or go get a bachelor's degree, and then we could talk. But for now, the answer is no. You guys can be
Yeah.
boyfriend and girlfriend all you want. But no, I would have I'm saying this, I'm sound tough now, but I would have a hard stance to put my foot down, and be like, no, because again, I just don't believe that people are getting married today for the right reasons. I think people are getting married, it's like, well, I think this is just the next step that we have to take, right?
Absolutely.
It's like
Yeah.
we've been dating for 2 or 3 years now. So I mean,
Right.
the next gradual step here in this process or this race is we have to get married now, and then
Yeah.
we have to have kids, and then we figure out what that looks like, what our house what our home looks like, and
Yep.
it's like, okay, but hold on, pump the brakes. Yes, you've been dating for 2 years, but have you been dating for 2 years? I mean, have you been committed to each other for 2 years to a point where you're
Right.
like, this is the person, like, I know them, they know me. The only thing we haven't done is live together. So, it's probably going to be a little awkward going to the bathroom for the first time in front of her. But outside of that,
Yeah.
I understand her quirks. She understands my quirks. And,
Right.
we're able to work things out. So that's to me where I think a lot of it is, whereas marriage has become very diluted and it isn't what it used to be. And so it is so easily for people to just say, well, I mean, if it's just, if we can't make it work, then we'll just get divorced. And, it is what it is. It's just like, that's a big deal. You're
Yeah.
not just breaking
Yeah.
up with this person. This is a big deal.
Right. It's a legal contract that gets severed, right? There's a whole process, right? It's funny. I have a theory I'd like to share with you, and
Okay.
this is my take on it, right? And by the way, not a mental health professional by any stretch of the imagination. So counselors and therapists out there, apologies in advance. You've done your schooling and you know far better than I do. But here's my take is back in the day, right? Parents' generation, grandparents' generation, there was a shared sense of responsibility. There was a unity. There was a community. My parents, oh my gosh, if I had $1 for every time my mom said, we used to sit out on the front stoop and the neighborhood kids would play and Mrs. Johnson would bring over a pie. And you're like, what is this, right? And then we all moved to the suburbs and we got our own houses instead of living in apartments, right? So my parents grew up in northern New Jersey, right? And then
Okay. Yeah.
we moved out to the suburbs in the woods, in the middle of nowhere. So we had our own individual houses. And so then this was our own domain. It was all about us. And so instead of it being about the collective, it became about the individual. And as people continue to evolve, right? It's more about me, 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 me. You lose track that in a marriage, there is another me in that equation.
Yeah.
And my wife, who's a divorce coach, certified coach, background in psychology, would say, she would describe it. So she is a little more qualified to speak to it than I am. But she would say to me, she's like, when people are yelling at someone, it's not about the other person, it's about themselves. It's about their frustration in their inability to communicate to the other person what it is they want. Right. And I said, okay, that's fair. But there's a caveat. What they want might not be warranted. The
Yeah.
other person might not want to give it to them. They might not be capable of giving it to them, right? Now, I'll tell you a little bit something about myself is I'm an only child, right? So I know you were talking about your brother. I'm an only child. So growing up for me, it's my way or the highway, right? Everything
Right.
I did was right. I got all the stuff. It was just me, 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 me. So now I get married and I'm like, what do you mean I have to share blank, right? What are you talking about, right? And it took a long time to recognize, like, okay, this other person is in my space or they want to go see this chick flick or what. We're not going to go see the big action movie. Why are we not doing this, right? And so that's where a lot of conflict happens when there's a disconnect between what parties want, getting their needs met, trying to communicate to those. And so as a professional negotiator, like that's what I do. Heck, I even teach negotiation, right? So in my world, there are ways that you can communicate with someone, negotiate with them, get the win-win, right? They get something, you get what you want, and everybody goes away feeling good, right? And that to me is what marriage is all about, right? And so, as guys, right? I'll give you an example. Like I play musical instruments, so I play the drums and the guitar and the piano, and these are not cheap things, right?
Mhm.
Drum sets are expensive, pianos are expensive. So every time I want to go buy a new guitar, it's like you got to save up your money, and and my wife was like, "Do you really need another guitar?" It's yes, I do. Okay, but to when she comes in and says, I want to fly to Florida and visit my parents for a week, no problem. I want to get a puppy. Okay. I want to buy a new wardrobe. Sure. Meanwhile, I'm wearing the same ratty shorts I've had for the past 20 years that have holes in them because they still are fine. Okay.
Yep.
Don't throw those out, right? I love these shorts. But that's the trade off, right? You recognize that even if it isn't right at that moment, if you put some like in the bank of goodwill, right? Oh, sure, babe, that. And then the dress looks great. Oh, those look great. I can't wait to take you out wearing that new outfit, right? Then when you go ask for that other guitar or drum set or, whatever, then you've got some cred, right? And then there is that give to get and that you appreciate that even though I don't like clothes, she does. It's important to her. So therefore it's important to me, right? And that's, I really think is a key to maintaining relationships. And I will say this publicly, privately. I say this to my wife's face all the time. Anybody who's listening out there, I look her square in the face and I say, "You are a crazy person. I do not understand a single thing about you. Like, why are you putting salmon in your yogurt? Like, for example, right?" And I'm like, "That is a terrible idea."
Is that
She's like,
real?
"It's fair."
Does she do
Yeah,
that?
that is. She really does it.
Gosh.
It's
Oh wow.
terrifying.
Listen,
Terrifying.
I won't call your wife crazy, but
Yeah.
I won't
Uh,
understand that.
Oh no. And then she might put it on toast. So you're like, listen, there's a line here.
Okay.
Okay. That's food abuse. Okay. But you look at somebody and then that's where right in your head cue, you say, but this is my person.
Yeah.
This person might be a crazy person, but I find that really endearing. I would never eat that, but I find that very endearing that she does that because guess what? UQ and me and everybody else out there has a version of salmon and yogurt on toast, right? And
Yeah.
when they're looking at us and they're going, I don't know why you feel compelled to do X, Y, or Z. And you look at them like, how could you not understand this? That's the moment where you really know your relationship is strong, right? When you can
Yeah.
put your own self aside and you can say, I don't get it, but I support it. So there you go.
What's crazy is I put barbecue sauce on essentially almost everything. I love barbecue
Yes,
sauce.
why not?
And my wife is like, she's like, "What are you doing?" And I'm like, "What do you mean?" I'm putting barbecue
Right?
sauce on it, like, okay, like, so people are crazy. Like, apparently, like, I used to put ketchup on my eggs. Apparently, that's like a foreign thing to people, right? But now, because I love barbecue sauce, I'm like, well, barbecue sauce on my eggs. I love barbecue sauce, right?
Sounds
And
good.
like, my wife is like, don't no. It's like, what are
Right,
you doing?
exactly.
Like no,
Right.
that's disgusting. And I'm like, what do you mean? Like I'm like, I got look, this is how far it goes, folks. Like this is how I love it. So like I will have I'll have eggs and some like scrambled eggs and barbecue sauce, and then I'll have a bagel with butter and jelly on it. And I'll put the eggs with the barbecue sauce on the bagel
Why
and I'll eat
not?
it. And I'll
Right?
be like, this is great. And she's like,
Salty
that's
sweet,
disgusting.
perfect combo.
You're right. And she's like, that's terrible. And I'm like, I don't know. You're probably right to some extent, but I love this. And she, it's crazy. If she makes me breakfast, I can count on that the barbecue sauce is on my eggs. I don't have to. I don't
Exactly.
have to
Right.
I don't have to
Exactly. That's
like
exactly
like.
right.
And she knows. She's like, he likes this. I would never eat it, but he
I
likes
don't get it.
it.
Right. Exactly. That's exactly right. That's the key to a relationship. It's really, I said to my wife early on, and this is a negotiation, right? I say, if you focus on meeting the other party's needs and they focus on meeting your needs, neither of you is selfish and both of your needs are met,
Yeah.
right? It's like, look, I view our lives. You are a person by all means, and you're a person of service, right? You're in the military. I always appreciate that. My dad, same thing, right? I view all of us, no matter, forget your job for a moment. We are all people of service, right? So I'm a member of Rotary, right? And
Yeah.
Rotary Club, their motto is service above self, right? And so we go out into communities and we work with veterans and houseless people and abused mothers and shelters and food insecurity. And because we're blessed we're fortunate that we have roofs over our head and food in our bellies, and there are people who are not as blessed as we are. And so we say to ourselves, look, this isn't about me. This is about, hey, look what I did. I get to go home at night and put my head on the pillow and say, somebody has a bed tonight. because of the work our community collectively did, right?
Yeah.
And the same, your wife and you are a community, right? You're a unit.
Absolutely.
We're a unit. And
Yeah.
so if we are in service to others and above ourselves, right? And we're in service to our spouse, our children, our families, then it's all good, right? It's like
Yeah.
you're doing what you're supposed to be doing here, right? And if everybody kind of remembered that, I think we'd be a little better off collectively, but I won't get on my soapbox, right? But
Yeah.
that's the whole point of all of this, right? Service above self.
Yeah, I think that's the truth, right? And it to the point where, so many people, like you said, they just it turns into me, what are you doing for me? What have you done
Right.
for me lately?
Mm-hmm.
Versus like, gosh, she's been asked for a back rub for some time. Like, yeah, I suck at the back rubbing thing, and like, the
That's
idea of
bad.
sitting there for
Okay.
10 plus minutes just rubbing your back is very boring. I don't want to do
Right.
it. It's not that I don't love you. I'm just gonna be honest with you. I'm just like, them, my hands are gonna get all like, I'm just like,
Right.
is this good? Are you good? Like,
Are we done
yeah,
here?
yeah, like, because it's funny. It's again kind of one of those things. It's like, I'm not a person that likes to be touched, like groped on, like the whole let me just like rub your shoulder. No, please don't. I'm good. I
Right.
love
Yeah.
you,
Yeah.
but please
Right. Yeah.
don't do that.
Space.
Yeah, like I'm just, that's just who I am. And my wife though, she's like, oh yeah, come on, just give me a hug, and like let's hug for like 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Can we maybe do like 10 seconds?
Yeah.
Yeah, like, but like, I make it a point, because I know it's important for her, like when I come home from work, is I will literally come give her a hug, and I'm sitting there. Yes, in my head, I'm counting. I tell her this all the time. I'm like, I'm
Right.
counting the seconds until I can let go. Not because I don't love you, not because I don't want to touch you. Obviously, we have 3 kids together. It's just that,
Right.
this, again, doctors,
Yeah.
psychologists out there, if you diagnose me all you want. I'm just saying,
Right.
this is too much. Okay, we're doing this for too long.
Right.
I would like to be in my own space again, right? But I know she enjoys it, so I'll sit there and I'll do the extended hug and do the
Absolutely.
whole thing, right? Because
Yeah.
that's what she enjoys, and
Absolutely.
and one of the things you said earlier on, and was about, when it comes to the roles, is I I cannot do what my wife does, right? Like, my wife is
Yeah.
irreplaceable, right? Meaning, I go do the army, right? Like, I wake up early, I go do army, I come home late from doing army, right?
Right.
Um, I could not do what she does, in the sense of like, hey, figure out what it's to be to stay at home dad. Absolutely not. You cannot pay
Right.
me enough money to be a
Right.
stay at home dad. Nope.
No idea.
I
Right.
will
Yeah.
I will go work at McDonald's, and then I will go pick up trash on the side of the road
Right.
for before I be a stay at home. Not because I don't love my kids. Wholeheartedly, I
Right.
love my kids. I'm not spending every single waking moment with them though.
Right. Right. Yeah.
I am a person who needs to go be doing something. My
Hmm.
wife, she, from early on when we got married, wanted to do the stay at home mom thing. So
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
she's
That's
like,
good. She knows. Right.
yeah. So she's like, hey, I'm staying at home mom. I want to do this, and I'm like, I love you. You keep going, because no, again, I love my kids, and I have the Mediocre Dads podcast. You guys know, like, that's what
Right.
it's about, right? But like,
Yeah.
all day, every
Right.
day.
But that's smart, right? You got to know your roles, you got to know your responsibilities, and you need to be clear and communicate those up front, right?
Yeah,
Because you now understand, hey, look, this is who I am. This is who I am. This is what we're going to do. And then this way, in the future, right, when we talk about people who get a divorce, they never had those conversations. So now
yeah,
they're disappointed 15, 20 years down the road
yes,
because they're like, well, I didn't know you wanted, if I had known that, I wouldn't have married you. It's like, well, you should have asked that. Like, money styles, attachment styles, right? All those things. So I have an MBA in finance. I said to my wife, I said, listen, I have some news for you. We're going to have a budget. We're going to have a savings plan. You will retire comfortably, but I will never question if you want something, but I want to at least talk about it, right? I
hmm,
don't want you to come home and say, oh, by the way, I just bought X, Y, and Z and ABC, and then, I did X, Y, and Z. It's like, if you want to spend $10,000 on clothes, God help you if you did, because that'd be a different conversation. But if you wanted to, talk to me, tell me why. Don't be secret. Okay, you feel good about this? Yeah, okay, go for it.
yeah,
And I think a lot of that comes from, like you were talking about, with communication up front. You got to know what those roles and responsibilities and expectations are of each other, right? I'm expecting to get a hug from you, Q, from your wife when you come home from work, and and I'm expecting that Sports Center is on while if I'm rubbing your back, sweetheart,
Yeah.
like that's fine, right? And that's what you want, because you want to be able to have that person know that about you, and embrace that about you. And like, again, you're getting your back rubbed. You don't have to watch the sports highlights. It's totally fine. You can totally put your head down and ignore the TV, right? Oh my gosh, look at that play. It's like, that's what we're about. So
Yeah.
I make no apologies for it. And I think that's also, when you're trying to fit into somebody else's mold, that also kind of leads to those divorce situations, right? Where you've got to be yourself. You've got to embrace yourself for who you are. You've got to know thyself, right? You've got to really be able to do that soul searching, do that work, do that investigation into yourself, so that you do get into a relationship and you know who you are and they know who you are. I think that really could help with increasing the odds that you'll go the distance, right?
Yeah.
And folks who aren't willing to put in the time and the work to do that, I'll tell you a quick story. Is my wife, she gave me this book, and there's a famous, it's called the Gottman Institute, right? So it's this famous, marriage counselors. They've studied all these patterns of marriage, and they said that they could predict who's going to remain married and who's going to be divorced within like 20 minutes of meeting a couple. Like their studies, they were like 93% correct.
Oh, wow.
So I was like, dang, okay. So they wrote this book, basically like one of those, 7 habits of successful marriages type books. It's a famous book. And so my wife comes in and she's reading it, and, you're at the dinner table and, you're talking about, hey, did you see, I'm a big baseball fan. I'm like, oh my God, did you see the Dodgers sign this guy or whatever? And she's like, did you know that couples who did it, and you're going, oh boy. So I knew the next thing was going to be, I'd like you to read it, Joe. And so I'm like, okay, I love to read. I was like, no problem. So she was in the middle of reading the book. So I got myself a copy and I finished it before she did. And so she was like, what? I was like, yeah, let's talk about it. Now, this was the furthest thing that I was more interested in, who's doing X, Y, or Z, right? But the fact that I read the book, finished it, I said, okay, I'm willing to talk about it. That really went a long way, right? And by the way, when I read that book, there was a lot of stuff that really registered. And it's some of the stuff that I'm sharing today, where it's like, hey, guess what? You're not always right.
Yeah.
Guess what? It shouldn't always be your way. Guess what? You have to give to get, right? And I know that from my negotiation background. But it's all goes back to the whole thing about, being willing to not be mediocre and not just accept your station in life, right? We all can improve. We can all grow. We can all move forward. I'm not saying you need to be the next rocket scientist or bodybuilder or movie star, but incrementally, little percentages, day by day, right? If you have 2 beers at the barbecue or whatever, or 5 beers or whatever, then tomorrow have 4, then the next day have 3, right? Don't not drink beer,
Yeah.
but just try to make these small improvements. And I say that the same in your relationship and the same in your marriage. And it can go a long way, right? People, if they see you're trying, you're not going to always get it right. Like, if I come home and, I, for example, bought my wife flowers and she's like, oh, thanks, sweetheart. But do you remember I'm wildly allergic to lilies? And so you're like, yeah, I think somewhere in my brain you might have mentioned that. So I'll go put these in a vase outside, but it was the thought that counts, right?
Yeah. That's awesome. It is, it's, again, it's one of those things where I think that at the end of the day is we have to be willing to want make the other person happy, and
Right.
vice versa, right? Like you there has to be a level of willingness for on each party to say like, hey, their happiness is important to me,
Hmm.
and if even if it's for just, even if it just means I get a smile out of them because
Hmm.
I came home and I was having a bad day, like, like that just lets me know like, hey, you're still caring, you're still there.
Yep.
And I think that's the level of commitment. That's a smallest commitment to obviously working to a bigger commitment. But I think it's about smaller actions rather than these big grandiose actions of like,
Right.
hey, I need to take us on this 3-day cruise to
Right.
the Caribbean, and that's gonna make sure that our relationship is, we're married for the rest of our lives. Like, not like, it's the smaller things that you do in each day that, I notice things that my wife does, and I know she notices things that I do that, that
Sure.
she knows that Oh, he didn't. He doesn't usually do that, and I appreciate that. He heard me
Right.
when I told him, "Hey, I'm not here by myself. This is both of our houses. This is not just
Right. Yeah.
this is not just my house, and I'm responsible to clean it. This is both of our houses. So I
Right.
appreciate if
Exactly.
you
Yeah.
clean up one, help me around the dishes or whatever the case may be. So it's some of those one of those things. It's simple. You just be like, all right, cool. I get she message received, and like you said, like being an action dude. Army for going on 12 years action dude. So
Right.
you give me directly
What do
of
you
what
need
you
done?
want, yeah, what it needs
Yep.
to be done. I will get it done. Right. Like I
Yeah.
got you. Like,
Absolutely.
and I can make it happen. But if you want me to guess, I tell my wife all the time, hey, listen, I am not a mind reader. I said, I wish I could read minds. I really
Right.
do.
Yeah.
But I said, I cannot read minds. And I said, I may
Right.
know you and I may understand your habits. I can't read your mind. Right. So
Right.
like,
Of course.
you have to tell me, I was like, you have to be able to tell me like, hey, I made me really frustrated when you finish eating and you just sat there and I cleaned up the whole kitchen table and did the
Right.
dishes and then you went and played video games. Like that upset me. Like I need your help. Like or what something to that regards, right? That didn't happen, people. It didn't happen, I promise. But I'm just
He
giving an
cleaned up.
example.
He really
Yeah,
did.
I really did. But
He put the
that's just
barbecue sauce away.
yeah, there we go. And that's just a small example. But again, I think that's what it's about. But Joe, it's been phenomenal to have you on.
Yeah. Thanks. Same
Before we
here.
get out of here,
Yeah.
where can people find you? Where can people learn more about you and what you do?
Yeah.
Hopefully
Great.
not to
So,
utilize your services. Not against your services, but
right. Yeah.
obviously I want people to
Exactly.
stay married.
Yeah, well, it's pretty funny. It's like, it's so funny. Our website is equitablemediation.com, and on there is a resource center. And in fact, it's very funny you mentioned that, Q, is we also have a service called marriage mediation, where we use the exact same skills that we use to help people divorce to learn how to improve their communication because the issues are so stereotypical: money, kids, roles and responsibilities, right? And it's like you can negotiate those things as well. And you can draft an agreement that says, I will take out the trash every Thursday, right? You can do this. And
Mhm.
that's the stuff that trips people up, right? So if you go to our website in the resource center, there's all kinds of articles on both, divorce, on, how to save a marriage. Because like we said, we're not pro-divorce, we're anti-conflict, right? So if people are going to choose to end their marriage, we want them to do it peacefully and respectfully. And so, but we have these resources for people to learn, to get educated. And also, I think, you made a really good point before. A lot of times, because people see this, they see whether it's TV or in our fast culture, they think everything's instant. They think divorce is so easy and they can just click a button and go online and my marriage is over. And if you read some of the stuff on our website, you'll realize what a process it is. And so I either want you to know that what you're about to get into, right? Because you've created this legal and financial entanglement when you got married, right? So you got to unwind that. That doesn't just happen, right? There were a lot of steps you had to take to get to where you got.
Mhm.
So one thing is you can learn about the process and what it takes to end a marriage through mediation, even with a lawyer, the divorce process in general. And it can either be, okay, I'm educated, I understand, let's go forward, or maybe this is a bit much at this point. Maybe we should circle back and rethink this and not take this decision so lightly, right? And we're supportive of that because there will be plenty of people who simply can't figure it out. And for one reason or another, perhaps didn't even belong together. We're here to help them get through this as best as we can. But again, right, it's just, you really just have to be willing to put in the work no matter what path you choose.
Yeah.
Stay married or get divorced, right? That's
Yep.
it really at the end of the day.
That's awesome, Joe. Well, like I said, I appreciate you coming on. Listen, guys, I love these conversations because they're real, they're raw, and they're genuine, and you learn so much about me as the host, but you also about the guests and about their life and what it is in other people's lives, and realize that. And I say this all the time that you realize that like you're not the only person going through this, right? You're not the only person who has this situation. Everyone likes to believe we have this obscure convoluted situation in our marriage and he just wouldn't get it and you're just like, oh no, I dealt with that last week, but continue. I'll listen. I'll hear you out. I help them, but Jess, tell me how you don't think I can help you, but like we like to think that we're like there's something more grandiose to our story when it's reality. It's like, it sounds like you just you weren't willing to listen, and at that very moment. So like, it's one of those things. Like, I'm not saying, there's not complications in marriages, but again, like I said, I love these conversations. I love having this and I appreciate you coming on, Joe.
Yeah, thanks.
Guys,
I loved it too.
absolutely, guys. Like I said, all of his stuff will be in the description, his website. Check it out. I think, again, if you unfortunately need to utilize their divorce services, then I think perfect person to help you out with the mediation, because I think mediation is essential. But if you're not right there, which I hope you're not, if you are, listen, check out their marriage stuff. I think that's awesome. I didn't know you guys offered that. I think that's freaking awesome. I think the mediation for the marriage, I think that's awesome as well, because a lot can change when you just realize it's just one little thing needs to turn. You know what I mean? Like, just one little thing needs to shift, and then you're like, oh my gosh, we're here, we're locked and loaded, we're good to go. So that being said, guys, you know how we do it here, but remember that being mediocre is a choice, and you have to refuse to be mediocre every single day. That is all I got for you guys. The Mediocre Dad's out.